We want young people who wants to think. We don't need them to think like Jorge. We don't need them to think like me. We don't think exactly equal on every issue. We have ideas, but that's part of what this country needs. After one special way of thinking that comes from government, the best thing to do against that is to think critically.
Welcome to the Going Big podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gentry, and this is the place where we celebrate bold moves and big ideas. Each week, I sit down with inspiring leaders, entrepreneurs, and change makers who are making a significant impact in their careers and in their communities. Whether you're looking to level up your leadership, pursue your passion, or just get inspired to take your next big leap, this is where those stories come to life. Now, if you're listening on iTunes, YouTube, or anywhere else you tune into podcasts, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Now, let's dive in to what it means to truly go big. Well, welcome to another episode of the Going Big podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gentry. My guests today are Jorge Velarde Rosso and Juan Pablo Chamon of Libera Bolivia. They are leading one of the most important movements, I would argue, going on in the world today with respect to the ongoing debate in the Americas, in Latin America. What should be the prevailing view of government? Is it one of freedom or is it one of socialism? That is a debate that's been going on in their country in Bolivia, but has been going on throughout all of the Americas, and it's very important for the future of us all. In their effort, Libera Bolivia, they are helping to develop young leaders of the future, to shape public policy debates, and to really have a conversation about how we should be governed in terms of the role of the individual and the role of government and society. Recently, I had Daniel DiMartino from Venezuela on the Going Big podcast, and he said that, the problem with socialism is that it never turns out very well. And I recently had David Rubenstein, who noted that free market capitalism is not perfect. But as Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst system other than all the others. And it is certainly preferable to communism and socialism. But yet that is a debate that has been raging throughout the world, but especially in the Americas and Latin America in particular, for a number of decades. So first of all, welcome, Jorge and Juan Pablo. It's great to have you on the Going Big podcast.
Thank you for having us, Kevin. We are really honored to be here with you.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Well, I'm honored to have you with me, and I've gotten to know you, and I really admire the leadership and dedication that you've shown in these efforts. We have a lot to talk about today, but just for the benefit of our audience, just give us a sense what has happened in your country, in Bolivia, through the past couple of decades. I think it's fair to say that in the Americas for the past 100, 150 years, there has been a back and forth between sort of and many times, a nationalist approach to government, others a socialist approach to government. A lot of times it leads to authoritarianism and the loss of rights. Just for context, what has been the situation until very recently in Bolivia?
For the past 2 decades, we have the administration of Evo Morales and his party. It meant that he built an electoral machine, also a rent distribution economy, and a capture institutionalized system. This all came with the use of the natural gas revenues, but not in order to build institutions or to create a more prosperous country, but to create a system where political control works perfectly. And this became also with criminal organizations entering into the state function. So what we have, as I'm mentioning, it's like the recipe of the complete disaster. It's like when you destroy the institutions on one hand, but you also destroy the economy, and then you see that you have like a small country where you can't speak freely. Yeah, you cannot say your ideas freely. You also have the problem that if you want to participate in politics, it's going to come with a high cost. And at the end, the economic crisis that goes against all of those who doesn't have the enough means to survive. So this was part of the disaster where we created what we're working right now, which is Libera.
Well, I actually think, and we've known each other now for a couple of years. I think not only what is happening in Bolivia, but is happening throughout the Americas has enormous consequences for the world. And I'm glad that we can get to the root of a lot of this. We have a lot to discuss, as I mentioned. Now, in recent years, many of the socialist governments have lost power in South America in particular. We saw that in Argentina, in Chile, recently in Peru, recently again in Colombia. Is it a rejection of those socialist ideas? So you had an election in 2025 last year where Morales came in a pathetic, distant. His party was just, utterly repudiated. Was it a repudiation of socialism, or was it a repudiation of just a bad economy and bad circumstances and crime, and people wanted a change? Jorge, what's your view on that?
Partially, it's just the rejection of bad policies and the consequences of 20 years of socialism. But personally, and I think also in Libera, we think that part of the problem in the country is that people want a change, but the leaders don't dare, because probably they don't understand, to propose more freedom, not only in the political realm, but also economic freedom. So our bet in Bolivia, in Libera, is that we Bolivians want free markets, but no leader yet wants to talk about that. Because of, you mentioned, nationalism and socialism being so culturally important in the country.
Something that I think is really important about the last election in Bolivia, the president passed, the current president, he won the elections with the slogan, capitalism for all. And after 20 years of socialism, it's a huge cultural change. Now we should put on the balance if he's making the decisions, taking us to a more capitalist economy. That's part of the debate that we have today. But in some sense, he had a good idea of what people want, or especially what young people want. So if we have to think about the conditions that we have now, I don't think that we have a victory, the complete victory, but we have a great opportunity with what you are mentioning right now with the changes on the region.
Well, I certainly want to get into what you're doing to spread ideas and a debate about these ideas. But since the election, you don't have really the sense of rule of law and safety and stuff that we would hope for. What does that mean for people in Bolivia right now, for people like you in the idea space, for journalists, for people who want to speak out? Do you have a freedom of speech and expression, or is it challenged by the previous leaders, or what's going on?
Right now, the situation is way better than a year ago. A year ago, it was really hard to speak freely on the streets and also in the media, and say and being able to say something against the government. You could go to jail. Also, that was part of the deal of our work. We had to suffer some consequences of it, because what we were doing, it was the thing that bothers most to the authoritarian politicians, that is training young leaders. Like, you are creating the different leaders in a different mindset than the one that they wish. And that had a high cost. If we have to talk about these consequences of 20 years of socialism, we could mention, for example, the World Justice Project of the World Bank established that the judiciary system in Bolivia is one of the four worst in the world. So if you have all these conditions, as I was mentioning, economic crisis, but also the institutional crisis, this is the complete disaster that you have to face. And that this is part of the game that we're playing on. And at some point it's okay, but it has a price. You have a really nice monumentum or a statue there in Washington, D.C. that says freedom is not free, but sometimes we don't know what it means. No? I think that we can tell this from the first hand, that freedom, or also working for freedom, has a price, which we are really willing to pay. We are completely okay with that. We are not victims of working for freedom. Actually, we are really happy of our work and very optimistic about the future. But we know that this comes with this kind of price: persecution, silence, exile, and stuff like that. This is how Bolivia looked like 1 year ago. With the change of government, there are some changes. Also, the position of the judiciary system is changing. They are trying to get more independence. But this is going to take years, and this is part of what we know. That's why our hope is not on what is going to happen on the next month. Our hope is what are we going to build for the next 5, 10, 15 years, because as you know, Kevin, and that's part of what I admire of your work, this is a decision of life. This is what you have to make for your life. This is not just, okay, now I want to work for freedom and that's it. We have to work until the end. We have to work until we can give to our sons, our relatives, to the people of our countries more freedom.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's learn a little bit more about the two of you and your journeys. Jorge, you were somehow exposed to the ideas of freedom, of free markets, of property rights and limited government and free exchange. How did that happen, and how is it that you decided to devote your life to sharing these ideas in an effective manner with more people?
I get that question a lot because part of the purpose of Libera is to transmit freedom ideas of limited government, free markets, personal dignity. And in the context of Bolivia, that was rare. When I was a student, I was always kind of curious, kind of nerdy, so to say. So in a way, I looked by myself some sources that teachers wouldn't give. The main one, I would say, and I always said it, the one who turned me a classic liberal was Joseph Ratzinger. And that maybe sound curious, but yeah, reading Joseph Ratzinger, I discovered that the best possible society is a free society. So there I began to look up some other classical authors, and I get to know the Austrian School of Economics. And when I began to study there, when I went to live in Buenos Aires, that in Argentina, you know, there are many think tanks that work with these ideas. So I get to meet one of my mentors, Gabriel Zanotti, that had the patience to teach me Austrian economics, like tutoring and very personally. And in my head was, I can smuggle these ideas to Bolivia. There's no customs for ideas. You don't have to declare you are bringing ideas to the country. I had this image from the very beginning. It's like, I can smuggle these ideas to the country. No one's gonna know. So I was a young teacher or college teacher in the Catholic University here in La Paz. And in my head it was, well, I can begin searching for some students. Juan Pablo was one of them in 2011, with this idea that I can teach you some ideas that I know for sure you're not going to see at the university, because I graduated a couple years before. I was a college teacher with only 25 years. So I knew the teachers that were teaching in the faculty, and so my only leverage was I have something new that you're not going to see, and that's how we began knowing each other and working together.
Well, you're considered the intellectual architect of these efforts, certainly of Libera Bolivia. How did you decide that you wanted to create an institution, an organization devoted to these ideas in a way that would advance these ideas?
Because there was nothing remotely similar, I decided to begin something. I always say, if there should have been, or if there was something similar, I wouldn't have this idea that we should begin from scratch. But really, classic liberal ideas, especially Austrian economics in Bolivia, was non-existent practically. So the idea is, well, you have to begin if there's nothing. And probably it was over-optimistic on my part, I don't know, but I think when, I like this phrase, when something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are against it. So that's how, and actually the original question, so to say, with Juan Pablo as my student back in 2011 is, let's begin to work and let's see how it goes. And here we are, 15 years later.
Well, this is the Going Big podcast, and I like to highlight visionary leaders like the two of you, because when you cast a big, bold vision, in my judgment, it inspires others to take action. Is going big part of the culture in Bolivia, or is what you did unusual in terms of really stepping out in the way that you did?
I would say it's totally unusual in that sense. I would say one of the most difficult tasks I personally have, I think, giving the young leaders the trust in themselves. Because Bolivian culture is the total opposite. So identifying a potential leader and giving them the confidence to see what you kind of see in them, but they don't see that in themselves, and the culture doesn't help. No. Bolivian culture doesn't help.
All right. Well, let's now turn it to more about Juan Pablo Chamon. What did you see in him as a student? Tell us about you as perhaps the leader, the mentor, and recruiting somebody to also come into leadership like Juan Pablo.
The interesting thing in general in Libera is that we don't have like a template that you check and you say, this is, and 15 years ago, even less. What I think I saw in him, he was curious. Not necessarily the nerdy kind of student I was mentioning I was, in the sense that even he was, there's a funny anecdote I have with him, because it was the teacher was a very challenging moment for me as the teacher in the room, because we were discussing something about history, and Juan Pablo said to another student, "Are you dumb?" so to say, with a more strong word, or what? And I would say, okay, I get your point. It's not necessary to use that language, but I totally get your point. And that's part of what you, again, it's not a template, but yeah, he was like energetic and curious. And I told him, I can teach you some ideas that you're not gonna see in the university. And he also was responsible in that sense, because he committed to this kind of personal tutoring, and yeah, those features.
Juan Pablo, why don't you pick up the story now? what did you see at that time, and how did you get inspired by these ideas that Jorge was sharing?
I think context is really important, Kevin, because back then in 2011, Evo Morales was highly popular here in Bolivia, and some of the
And in the world.
and some of the most important newspapers in the world, especially the New York Times and some of the others, they were talking about the case of Bolivia as the socialism that works. They were saying that this was a huge impact with an indigenous president where everything was working really well. But as you mentioned in the beginning, if you know the theory, you can say with authority that socialism is not going to turn out well. And I have some feelings about it, but I didn't have the ideas. It was my first semester of the university, and I knew I had time. I knew that some of the lessons that I was receiving in the university, they were like a complete disaster. It was Marxism and some of the topics that we're discussing of how the Bolivian model was working really well and things like that. But I didn't have like the tools to enter into the debate. I am really curious, and I'm also really executive. I mean, if you give me a task or a homework, I'm gonna do it like right away because I need to solve things quickly. And that's what I found with Jorge, because I was in this transition from high school to the university, and in high school I had, I don't know, like maybe 8 or 9 different activities, and then in the university I didn't have anything to do, so I had a lot of time. And sometimes there is also like, and I think that this can explain a lot of in world history. I'm not saying that this is world history, but if there are good encounters of people, amazing things are gonna happen, and that's what experience tells you, because what you only need, and this is something we found about like in 2019, I think, is that a key word in the history of Libera Bolivia is commitment. And if you find the right leaders, but not only the right leaders, but the people who has the precise commitment to change things, that they know that they can do things not only today but tomorrow and for the next years, this is gonna work. Eventually, this is gonna work.
And interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but since you mentioned it, it's when we were working with this idea of commitment. The people we were working with because it's part of our mission said, if you're speaking to young people, you can use that word. That's a very strong word for young people.
It was a marketing specialist.
Yeah, and the point was, no, we want the ones that can commit. We don't want huge crowds. We want few that can commit to a long-run dream, so to say.
And that's what we have at the moment. I mean, I can teach you this couple of different books that you won't find in your formation for the next years. Do you want to learn more? And the answer was yes. And now that's Libera. It didn't have a name at the moment. It was like a Project X, maybe. I don't know what was. It didn't have a name, but we have the dream. We had the dream.
That's great. Well, now it has come into its influence, and it is a very influential institution. But before it had a name, and before you were getting started, you started much smaller. When did you begin to see that it had the potential to actually have an influence on the conversation in Bolivia?
I think the vision was always in the long run. And in that sense, we understand that for having that credibility, you have to create that credibility. You have to give them that confidence. So part of our work from the beginning was and we didn't know when the Evo Morales government will end back in 2011 or in all those years. So our mission was always we must to prepare ourselves when the time comes to speak, and that partially happened in 2019 when Evo Morales was forced to resign because of a civil movement. And that's when we decided, for example, to open the first office, because before that, we didn't have an office. Strategically, part of because we didn't want to be easily traceable, for example. So when Evo Morales fell in 2019, we said, now is when we can begin working in a physical office. So we rented our first space in January 2010, and by March we had the worldwide pandemic. So it was how we pay rent for a space that we can't use. So it was.
But if I can tell a little anecdote of the inauguration of our first office, and I think it goes with your question. To that inauguration went, and we didn't know he was going to go, the Minister of Education at that time.
From the transition government, yeah.
Of the country. And he was saying some words, and he was telling all the people how much he admires our work. And I think that's when you notice the impact. But you also notice the impact not on the newspapers or maybe on TV. We were noticing the impact of our work in the evaluations that some of the young students who were receiving our formation were answering, and then you were seeing some of the ideas on different parts where they were spreading them, and you know that you're building a different infrastructure that the one that we have at the moment, because if we had like the feeling of going with the easiest solutions and with the ideas of the moment, of course that it would have been easier, but it wasn't our idea. I mean, we have an intuition. We also had ideas, and we were looking for the young people who wanted to learn more. And this is something that says a lot of what we're doing, because we were not training young people who wants more liberalism in Bolivia, classical liberalism in Bolivia. We want young people who wants to think. We don't need them to think like Jorge. We don't need them to think like me. We don't think exactly equal on every issue. We have ideas, but that's part of what this country needs. After only one special way of thinking that comes from government, the best thing to do against that is to think critically.
And if I may also to add, because I know that this podcast is also for people who are seeking for fundraising tips too. Part of this building credibility in the long run was because our first experiences with businessmen here in the country. In 2015, 16, we tried to reach some. And actually, a very funny anecdote I love to say is the first one we have with a very big businessman was in this very, very space, in this office.
In the same table.
He was sitting here and I was sitting here. Juan Pablo was sitting in front of me, and he came as a good businessman, said, "What do you want? I don't have money and time." And it was like a big shock. It's like, oh, what do I say? So we built that relationship in the long run. So I'm not going to enter in every detail. But 5 years ago, he told us, go to that space. I'm not using that offices. So Libera's offices are now this space where we have one of the first fundraising meetings that for some people would have sounded like a failure, because he began as, I don't have time and money. What do you want? It's like, okay. And now it's our space.
That's a great story. Well, I like that you're focused on the long term. You're focused on the future. Also, the influence that you're having among future generations is another part of this conversation I'd like to have today, because what you're doing is a big deal. But before we even get there, a little bit more of your own personal story. Juan Pablo, you in many ways became the public face of Libera. You mentioned the print media, you mentioned television. You were challenging the ideas of socialism in debate out in the public square. It was being broadcast. How did an authoritarian socialist government respond to you doing that?
It's never easy to talk about it, but this is part of our journey, and I think it's good to mention it. One of the great lessons that we teach here, and it's part of Jorge's inspiration, is that everyone in the office has to enjoy what they do. And part of it is that, for example, Jorge doesn't enjoy going to TV shows and talking about like against the government and things like that. I do really love that, and I used to enjoy it a lot. And part of this journey also gave us a lot of great friends around the world. So what we were doing, it was building not only our local infrastructure of freedom. We were building friendship with people who were changing things around the Americas, and actually we don't know what exploded everything, in the sense that made the past government to start a persecution against the work that we do. The accusations that they had against me, that it was public instigation to commit a crime, and also to being like the mastermind of a criminal organization. Maybe this half an hour we were telling us what it means a criminal organizations for authoritarians. It's like that's what it meant to them. But we knew it was going to happen at some point. We didn't know how, we didn't know when, we didn't know what the decisions we had to make at the moment, but you also have to make a lot of choices at the moment that you receive an accusation like that with the judiciary system I was mentioning you before, because if you receive an accusation from the government, it means jail in the authoritarian systems. It doesn't mean other things. You cannot go against the river. It's like that's what the lawyers say, that's why a judge is going to tell you, that's why everyone knows how it comes, because at some point a capture system, justice system, makes persecution look like something else on the normal life of the people of a country. So I had to leave Bolivia for a couple of years. Actually, this is an amazing thing, to being able to have this interview and to record this podcast at the same physical space as Jorge, but also of being able to do it in La Paz, being close to my family. It has a high cost. It's never easy. I wouldn't say like it was an amazing journey that I would recommend to everyone that is fighting against authoritarian system and also wants socialism out of their countries. No, I wouldn't desire this, not even to my worst enemy, because this is not part of the battle that we are fighting. Actually, we are fighting this battle, so the people who doesn't think like us, they can do it freely. So the people who wants to create something like Libera, but with different ideas, they are going to be able to manage it with freedom, but also with the best conditions. Because part of our dream is to become a country where we have like not only the institutions, but also a culture of liberty where we're gonna give all of our people the opportunities to fight on their ideas. And then, of course, that we have the confidence that the best ideas are going to win. And of course that we have the confidence that the leaders that we're training are going to be able to communicate those things that we are telling them. And also that this that I had to happen, I had to live, but not only me, maybe a lot of more Bolivians, because of different things that they were doing, is not going to happen anymore. Because this is part of the challenge that we have, and that is why I was telling you, we have an opportunity right now, not yet a victory, and maybe the victory is not going to be on this life. Maybe the victory is somewhere else. But what we know is that we are going to fight this battle until the end, and this is part of our commitment. And if you allow me, let me thank publicly to the team of Libera, because at the time it wasn't only my decision to leave the country. It was also an institutional decision to keep going our work, because it was easier to close what we were doing, to maybe Jorge focus on his work, on his academic work, and that was it. But what we did, it was going from a team of people, of 4 people, and maybe one year later with me on the exile, we were 6, 7. We were growing up. So it was part of this lesson. So if I can tell you, maybe the conditions were not the easiest ones, but if you're building something worthy, it works anyway.
Well, I definitely want to talk about this new opportunity now and what gives us hope. But before we leave this subject, I want to make sure I fully understand. So when you were speaking out effectively against the government in power, and they were trying to trump up charges that you were engaged in some criminal activity, because it would be tough if they just arrested you for speaking out. Did you have some advance notice that they were coming for you and you slipped away? How did you know to get out of the country?
Thanks to some friends, actually. Some of them that they were inside of the system, but some of them, they were part of this group of friends that we have around the world, because they knew that what is going to happen after that accusation. And actually they wanted us to enter into the judiciary system right after Christmas, and it was like an indicator of what was going to happen. So I know I think I don't tell this. I haven't told this anywhere, but I had to leave the country the day of Christmas, because it was like the less risky day, and I knew that they were less risks of doing that, and it was part of the decision you have to make. You never know what you're doing in that situation, because you never fully understand of what it means. And if I could tell you, this is like I remember that when I was a kid, I loved to get out of school and go into my home. It was like the best time of the day. And I know it is what happens to all of us every day. Like, you end your work day or anything you have to do, and when you're going home, it's like the best part of your day. And this is why, like, this was like a nightmare. I mean, you were ending your day, but you didn't have the opportunity to go back home. That's part of the nightmare that they want to give you. What's the cost? Maybe silence, maybe giving up your work. Maybe it was easier for me to come back and negotiating with them and telling them, I don't know, what we were doing with Libera, we're not gonna do it at the same way anymore. Or I don't know, but it was never on the table. It was never an option. It was like, if I have to wait 1, 2, 5 years, that's what I'm gonna do, and I knew it was part of the cost of the work that we were doing.
Well, Juan Pablo, as you know, we met soon after you fled Bolivia, and it was your telling me the story then that I then wanted to have you on this podcast. And I'm so glad that you've stuck it out and we've been able to do this today. You know, I think for a lot of our audience is in the United States. We have people listening from all over the world. But for those in the United States, the idea that you could be arrested for speaking out for your views is pretty radical. It's more in discussion in recent years, but it's still a radical notion. Knowing what you know now, knowing the threat that you faced then of speaking out, if you had it all over to do again, would you have spoken out?
Yes, of course, with no doubt. I mean, what I would do, maybe it's the same, exactly the same, because I think that Jorge always tells this very well, but Libera is a dream, and that dream is working really well. And the reason that is working really well is that because we are working every day on a different country. And I don't know, maybe there is a lot of people doing the same in Bolivia, but if I know that there is a group of people working a lot of hours every day to make this country more prosper, with a better justice, with better conditions, I know that that is happening at this office. So why not? I mean, it had a lot of high costs. I couldn't say goodbye to my grandmother. I couldn't be with my mother at the time that my grandmother passed away. I couldn't be at some of the weddings of my best friends, but I knew that at some point, if we were doing this work, this would happen, because what we were challenging, it wasn't a small thing. But when you know what you're playing, and when you also know the value of freedom, you know that it's not going to be free.
Well, let's bring that to today and to the future. I said at the outset of our conversation that many governments recently, socialist governments, have been voted out of power in Latin America in recent months and years. And of course, as we see in Argentina under Milei, he's been outspoken in terms of his support for free market capitalism. Cast in Chile has also been outspoken. That's not always the case. And we also know that in many cases, voters may have been just rejecting the status quo, rejecting bad economics under socialism, not necessarily rejecting the ideas. But you are hopeful about the future in your region and in Bolivia because of where young people are. And that is a big focus of the work of Libera Bolivia. Why are you both so hopeful about the future? Why is this in the moment of the Overton window?
As Juan Pablo mentioned it earlier, although we don't think that they are really honest with their own campaign motto, or this idea of capitalism for all, or popular capitalism, but that's part of this like design. The Overton window is shifting, so the winning team, the current president, won on this idea that Bolivians want and understand intuitively freedom. What we're lacking in Bolivia is leaders that understand deeply what freedom means and why you have to defend it, freedom. That's part of this dream. It's like the young leaders we're training understand they have to defend freedom because it works. You were mentioning at the beginning, I would say that free markets and capitalism might be flawed because we are flawed. Humans are flawed. It's not the system. And that's very important to understand, that, but because that's also a part of the anthropology of classic liberalism. You can't handle too much power to a flawed human being. That's Acton idea of power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then Evo Morales was the best example of that. He had absolute power, and as all tyrants, ended up with the worst vices you can imagine. So we see that common people, but live freely. That's like a good outcome from a small state, a small government, not because they want to be small, because they are incapable of being as strong as they want. So when an inefficient government like the Bolivian one had created spontaneous orders, spontaneous free markets, and that's what we're seeing. So in a nutshell, it's like we are optimistic about the future because we see Bolivians are hardworking people that want to prosper.
All right, well, you could have made this all about a debate around ideas and winning elections, but you've really made this about investing in future generations. Why did you decide to make that strategic choice?
Because 15 or 10 years ago, we knew that we didn't have enough leaders to fight this battle. And also, if you let me add to Jorge was mentioning before, if hope is merely a sentiment, it was the sentiment that we have like 10 or 15 years ago. But hope is discipline. And that's the discipline that is taking this work. And it's making this work going forward. And what we know is going to change things is that we have the right leaders, the right ideas are going to be in power. And if those ideas are in power, there is no way that we're going to lose this battle. But we have to be patient because we cannot change everything in 2 years. We cannot change the situation of the last 20 years in 1 or 2 months. We cannot say like we have the magical solutions to the problem that Bolivia has. But what we can say right now to the people that is supporting our work, to the people who's watching what we're doing, is that we have the right people for the Bolivia's future. And if we don't have hope on that, we couldn't trust on anything, because we know that we have those young leaders who wants to stay in this country after all of the nightmares that we have around, after all of the difficulties that we're living daily. But at some point, if you discover that hope is the thing that is going to make the Libera's dream work, you know that you can be really optimistic about the future. And that's something that some people accuse us that we are too optimistic. And if you see Jorge's face, you'll see that it makes us really happy that they accuse us of being optimistic about Bolivia's future, because it's really easy to be cynical about the future. It's really easy to be cynical about what is going to happen tomorrow. If I tell you, oh, tomorrow there is going to be a lot of sad people, or tomorrow we're going to have a really hard day, that's the easiest way to analyze the future and the things that are happening right now. But if you trust in your work and you also have a clear dream, that's when things work.
Well, I think we're grateful that you're optimistic, that you've had hope, and that you've had this extraordinary level of commitment. I mean, you're the ultimate expression of dedication and leadership. Well, let's wrap this up. This is the Going Big podcast. For any person around the world listening, any young person in particular who wants to speak out, act in favor of these ideas of freedom, what would you say to them about going big, about dreaming big, thinking big, and going big? You've done that. What would you say as we close to inspire others to act as you have?
I prepared this quote from Lord Acton's History of Freedom that I love, that says, "At all times, sincere friends of freedom have been rare, and its triumphs have been due to minorities." So that's also a very powerful idea. We don't have to be like huge crowds. It's like creative minorities, and I go back to Ratzinger. It's like creative and minorities make the difference.
Juan Pablo?
If I have to think about going big, I think that we have to create a framework of our choices. If our choices are silence, exile, or submission, it's impossible to go big. But if your challenges are ideas, are also courage and institutions, that's the way that you are going to be able to go big and make a difference in the world. And that's where is our hope and also our work.
Well, Jorge Velarde Rosso, Juan Pablo Chamon, it's great to know you. Thank you for joining us today on the Going Big podcast, and I hope that you have great continued success. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks for tuning in to the Going Big podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling energized and ready to tackle your biggest goals. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps spread the word, and it gets these inspiring stories out to more people. You can also find more content, resources, and updates at our website, goingbigpodcast.com. Remember, the only limits are the ones you don't challenge, the limits that you impose on yourself. Keep pushing, keep growing, and above all, keep going big. See you next time on the Going Big podcast.